Good morning, everybody. Hi, guys. It's 9:02 a.m. Thank you for joining us on this morning, which is a public holiday. We're so happy to have you guys. As you can see, we have a visitor today again. Please put your hands together for Tim. So Tim is a friend of ours from church. We were really excited to have him on because during circuit breaker, we saw that he started something online on his Facebook called the Holy Club, and Gillian and I were very, very interested and taken by it. So we decided to just invite him on to have a conversation with us about the Holy Club, about himself, because we know each other, but we don't really, really know each other. So,
Now we're gonna get to know each other.
yes, exactly. So, thanks for joining us, guys. And we're going to start with our regular question. So, if you're watching us, feel free to join in. So, the question is, what is one thing that you are or were grateful for from the week that just passed? So, over to you, Jill, this side.
Okay, so I'll go first. Morning, everybody. One thing that I'm grateful for this week, I think, is a lot more rest. So some of you may know that I have a 8.5-month baby, and we're actually trying to do this thing called sleep training. So many people actually have different versions of what sleep training is. So a quick tip for who are like parents or who are going to be parents or want to be parents, like sleep training has like so many methods, and it's not just the verbal method, which is called the cry it out method. You don't just leave your child there and like bye bye for like the whole night. While some people, they actually do that and it works, but for me, like, I don't think I can do that. So we actually use many different methods, and we really go by understanding like what our child needs. So sometimes it's about picking him up, sometimes about like just going to his crib and saying, hey, mom and dad are here. So different methods of sleep training, but I think eventually we managed to have some breakthrough this week. So my husband and I, we've been able to have normal sleep for 2 nights. So
Wow.
it's been 8 months since we had normal sleep. So it's like amazing. Yeah. So I think I'm really very thankful for that, because I think in some of the past conversations that we had, I did mention that, just physical sleep actually can make a whole lot of difference to even our, our emotions and our mental capacity. So sometimes, we really cannot belittle like physical sleep, to be the solution to some of the things that we are feeling or going through. So I'm very grateful for that. Yeah. How about
What
Tim?
about you, Tim?
Yeah.
So, for Tim, the thing that I really, really am excited about and thankful for last week was
Turns in our mental capacity. So sometimes, we really cannot
so it
belittle
was
physical
it was
sleep,
this
to be the
idea
solution to
that
some of.
I belong to this community, and one of my friends was celebrated nationally twice last week.
Wow.
And so
Okay.
what happened was they have this small cake company, and it was really struggling to take off. And
Okay.
by some chance of fate, I suppose, or God's blessing upon their lives, um, they were actually contacted by 8 Days, and so 8 Days did an initial cover story on their little business, and within the first 3 days of the publication, they got 300 orders for cakes. And so, what's really interesting is they started this little company because they have a son with Down syndrome, and they wanted to create a business entity so that their son could have something productive to inherit for his own life in the future. Because Down syndrome folks are very simple and content people, and having one thing to tide this guy through for his whole life is entirely a possibility. And not only did a massive resurgence happen for this little cake company, right? As a result of the first 3 days of getting their first 300 orders, they actually started a foundation for kids with Down syndrome. It instantly. So within 1 week, people who are very close to my heart were propelled into a level of financial security that for a very long time they have not seen. And like, even though last week was a fairly ordinary week for me, because these people are close to my heart, right? it was an extraordinary week for me because
Wow.
of their achievement. I celebrate, Yeah.
Yeah.
So, may I, if it's okay with the two of you, can I just like mention the brand?
Yes,
Of
Yes,
please.
please.
so it's called Upcakes, UPCAKES, and Upcakes is meant to be like a contrast to Down syndrome, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and so if anybody wants to, they have amazing chocolate cake and pretty good like Mao Shan Wang cake.
I
Uh,
gotta say something. I just
yeah.
had it yesterday.
Oh, you did?
And I have the chocolate cake in my fridge. So everybody, please just buy the durian cake because it's just pure durian goodness in the middle of the cake. I was very taken by the quality of it because it can match up to like awfully chocolate. It actually reminded me a bit of Lana's cake. The
Yeah.
chocolate on the
Mm.
outside was very well done. So I would 110 I would 10 recommend this. I've already told my
100
parents I'm
upon
gonna
10.
order 100% and 10 I would recommend. Already told my parents about it, so they're gonna buy it next month for my
Wow.
sister's birthday. So they'll eat it while they call my sister who will not partake in the cake at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, that's why I had a great week. Okay, I'm done.
Awesome. You know, like the funniest thing about it is also like my sister-in-law was also sharing with me about it because I guess we're all from the same church, right? And her friend is part of the same cell group as your friends who own Upcakes. Yeah, and then I think also he has two other businesses. One is like a kids furniture and then one is a carpentry business. So I think it's like so amazing that, even in any of our own circumstances, right? Like it's really not a limitation as to how much we can do and how much, creativity can really bring us, different businesses and all of that. And I think it all comes from passion and like your heart, right? So just so encouraging to see. Yeah, and I mean, I was looking at some of the furniture for the kids' playgrounds and stuff, and I'm like, wow, it's really so amazing. So like, if any of you wanna check that out as well, I think it's Essa Grace, right? Essa Grace is the furniture company as well. Yeah, so I think it's so amazing that even part of community we are able to kind of help each other and just share about like what we do as well. So I think it's amazing.
Yeah, definitely. But I want to mention also though that even though so this particular guy, right? His name is Aaron, right? And he's like a maverick, he's very interesting when it comes to the work that he does, and he does stretch himself, and sometimes we even tell him like, bro, you need to slow down, man, you're stretching yourself too thin. But some people are just built for adventure, some people just built for entrepreneurship, right? And many people see the successes, but the failure journeys and the journeys of strain on the family relationship or strain on the finances when you're a bit too adventurous. I mean, those are real considerations also,
Yeah.
So, like, interesting, right? This conversation is called Fully Human, and many times when it comes to entrepreneurs, we celebrate the successes, but we are totally
Yes.
oblivious to like the sufferings
Yeah.
that not just the individual goes through, but the marriage goes through, or the relationship between parents and children go through. So when jumping into something like this, count the cost before you build the house is what a wise sage once said, right? And yeah.
I think this is very close to our hearts because I know Jen and Jill, like Jill and her husband also, the entrepreneurs, and then last week Dom, he's also an entrepreneur. He's the only person like supporting his whole family, and to have kids is so hard. But I think it really takes a certain kind of person. It takes so much support to be able to build a business on your own and to be able to support your family with that. So please, guys, please support Upcake, support Aaron and his
support
family.
local.
Yes, support local. This is actually very close to my heart because what I'm very grateful for this week is our conversations with Fully Human. Like after our conversation with Dom last week on Monday, my whole week sort of revolved around our topic and our conversation. I was like, wow, I feel so grateful that we are able to share with each other as friends, as cell members, as church members, life and do life together, because I think that's very hard to find. And I'm actually very excited for our conversation today. Like, guys, look at him wearing our uniform.
Yes. I decided that it was compulsory that I show up to work in the uniform. And so I've noticed for the past few weeks that Yeah, you all belong to the National Rifle Association, so I decided to come with my rifles also. And I hope to have a great chat with you girls today. And I've been fascinated by what you're doing, and I fully support it. I really want you guys to succeed in this series of conversations, because we all need to be a bit more fully human. Or hashtag.
Oh.
Yeah, I
So
think
on
like
point.
even how like we were sharing about how we are grateful for, this week, and with Tim, what you said about even your friend who's starting these businesses, and now having some I would say FaceTime, or with 8 days featuring them and all. A lot
Yeah.
of times we don't see what goes on behind the scenes, and I think that it's really so apt for our conversation today about authenticity, and living how we're like inside and outside being the same, right? So yeah, I think this is something that three of us had actually talked about, and I think that Tim, I think you may want to share also about how you were talking about like how it's like to live authentically. And I think we can start by also asking you this question about like actually why did you start this thing called the Holy Club,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the Holy Club was a really interesting thing that came out as a result of a conversation that was had about 1 or 2 years ago.
Okay.
Um, plus, inner witness that something needed to be done for our generation. So one of the things that God's been speaking to me about is publishing. And I know that this is important and it needs to be done. But sometimes when you want to put yourself out there in video format and speaking off the cuff to an audience, it can be a bit intimidating.
Mm,
So I knew that I needed to start, but then why this particular thing? Why not any other thing like just like vlogging or doing a random
yeah.
like writing situation, right? It's because I had a conversation with a super incredible guy. His name is Jason Chua. About a year or two ago, in a Chinatown dim sum place, and he was telling me about this concept called the Holy Club. Now, the Holy Club was something that happened in the 1800s with a group of guys at, I think it was Oxford. And it was just like Christian fellowship in Oxford, right? And they would get together every day and they would ask themselves a series of 22 questions. And when they asked themselves the series of 22 questions, it allowed for them to be wonderfully accountable with one another. There was openness and freedom, no condemnation in their failure, but encouragement towards a greater goal. But also so they had this relationship built, but they were also able to really, really look within and still themselves from the deafening noise of the crowd and the world around them and recenter in on what they knew was fundamentally important. And with this, it was very much the product of this was very much like that story that we commonly hear about the class of generals in West Point that the stars fell on. There was this cadre, cadre of generals from one particular batch that a lot of them became 4-star, 5-star generals, right? From West Point. And the same concept happened for the Holy Club guys. So
Wow.
with this small group of guys, many of them went on to eventually become incredible church leaders of their generation. We're talking about Charles Wesley, John Wesley, George Whitfield. That I hope I'm not missaying the names, but anyway, that group of guys they were amazing. Okay, the Church of England really, really grew and benefited from what happened at that Holy Club, and so I thought, in Singapore's society, we do have a very noisy environment, and very often holiness as a thing is not really chased after. We chase other concepts with deliverables, things like evangelism or things like discipleship numbers or cell group
Numbers,
size
yeah.
for some churches or whatever it may be, right? But what about, apart from the quantitative aspects of our faith, what about our internal unseen qualitative aspects of our faith? Many times we hear it articulated as an obligation over the pulpit, but then when it comes to it actually being actualized, right, we don't often see an active and proactive and practical pursuit on how that looks like. And so Holy Club was a very practical way to help people in a social media generation pursue actively, practically the handles of holiness over 22
Mm.
days, because there were initially 22 questions, but we ended up with 31 at the end. And I mean, the questions kept getting added on. The community really blossomed and groomed. Every night I would have around 11 people steady watching with me throughout the whole
Wow.
stream. And to get 11 people to dedicate 40 minutes of their time every
Yeah.
night is not a small feat. You
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
know that people found value in the thing when they stuck with you through the whole process, and they would even call and say, are we doing it tonight? Are we doing it tonight? Yeah. So there was a market for it, and I'm very glad to see that people benefited from the process lah.
Wow. Can you share with us maybe one question from that 22 that really, I would say, struck you? Of course, all 22 would be great, right, to look internally. But one question that maybe would also benefit people who are watching now on Fully Human.
Yeah. Okay. Because there were 31 questions.
Oh,
it's
31,
hard to
sorry.
choose. No, I mean there were 30.
It was 22, it became 31.
Yeah, because there were so many, it's hard to choose just one. But if off the top of my head, I was just wanting to choose one, right? I bet it's so hard to choose. It's hard to choose from all your children who's your favorite. You cannot. So
Okay, you choose two. You choose two.
okay, no. I'll choose one. All right. It would be do I pray about how I spend my money, right? And that's and as we went along, this is a perfect illustration of how it develops, right? Initially, I was tackling this question from the lines of okay, Lord, all that I have is yours, and so whatever comes in terms of my income, I shouldn't just flippantly spend. I should pray about my expenditure items. We're not talking about things like char siu rice and chicken rice, okay? We're talking about big ticket items that we feel that we have the luxury to spend on because I earned it, so I can spend it, right? Yeah, maybe, but if you really are a mature believer and you have sort of thought deeper about your ability to live and move and have your being, and how your earning was enabled, and you were bought at a price, and you belong to who, and so your assets then belong to who, that's only level one of the thinking. What then happened was, as we went on for 22 days, it dawned on me that my money was a lot more than what I was just bringing in every month. It was about what was sitting in my bank account and what it was not doing. It was about an investment portfolio and where it was placed in. Was it placed in godly things or not? And it was more about a holistic perspective around, am I not just considering where I spend my money on frivolous things, but do I pray about donating? Do I pray about do I have too much just sitting there doing nothing and it's unactivated money, And so there were deeper questions that came up as a result of this introspection. And I'm glad to say that, as a result of that, I've had to relook some of my portfolios and make practical changes to the way I allocate my funding and my resources, Yeah, so I mean that's just one instance lah. For those of us who are a little bit more financially savvy, there's 30 other instances. So yeah.
Wow, that was such a good question.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about it. So Tim, actually I have a question for you that I think would be relevant in this sense. How do you define holiness, right? Because when Holy Club first started and I was like, hey Jill, Tim started this thing called the Holy Club, it looks really interesting. I was like, but how are other people going to look at it, right? People who unbelievers, right? Because I think there's this connotation. I was just telling Jill, I think in one conversation, that I met a guy that I hadn't, a friend of a friend I hadn't met in years, and we used to hang out to party together. And then I met him at a South member's wedding, and he's like, hey Kate. I was like, hi, I remember you, but I don't remember your name. And then he's like, hi, how are you? I heard from our mutual friend that you are so holy now, you've completely changed. And then I was like, okay.
Were you a party girl?
Yes, I was a party girl. So, he was just like, our mutual friend said that you're very holy now, you completely changed, you go to church very often. you're a believer. I was like, okay. And then the word holy sort of stuck with me. I was like, what does that mean? Like what? Like, I kind of, even myself, every day I'm asking myself, what does it mean to be holy? But I was also wondering, what does it mean to him to be holy? So I guess my question to you is, what does it mean to be holy
Yeah,
to you? Yeah.
I would say that there are two ways to approach this question. So I'm going to do so very quickly. One from an internal angle and one from an external angle. When you talk about the external angle, which is when your friend said of you, you are very holy, they could have been referring to one of these two things, right? So it is our relationship to society. That is the external angle with which we pursue, with which we understand and conceive holiness. So it's the idea of being set apart from something for a certain purpose. And that's more of a biblical definition, if you would say so, right? But I think that when we are living in a secular space, I don't think the concept of holiness needs to be totally irrelevant to the rest of people around us. I think that the way we conceive of the things of God and the discipleship journey should be as relevant to people who don't know God as it should be for those who do know God. And so what I would describe holiness as the internal journey and relevant to all is okay, this is going to sound a little bit complicated, but I'm just going to describe it as metaphysical consistency. So
Wow.
what does that mean,
I'm
right?
writing this down, by the way.
Please break it down for
Let me
us.
break it down for you right now, okay? Metaphysical consistency is truly just the idea that we are consistent in our external representations, what we believe in our hearts. So our metaphysical values, the things that guide our thinking, our belief structure, those are all internally held beliefs in two places, mind you. One is here in the heart and one is here cerebrally in the mind, right? Now the consistency of that means that what we think and believe has to demonstrate in our external actions. That's how we know that somebody is truly holistic, synced up. King David said, "Give me an undivided heart," and the reason for that is because there is often a schism between our intentions and our actions. And so, what I would say is, the idea of holiness is also internally perceived as metaphysical consistency because we have to. This is a summary of what I was just saying. So we have to behave how we internally feel. And so I would take it from two angles. And it's relevant for Christians as well as non-Christians.
Yeah.
So how do we do that, right? Because that sounds to me, actually that sounds very close to me, very, very similar to being authentic, or that's how I would view being authentic,
I would think
right?
so. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. That is a really good segue and perspective, Yeah. Wow.
And I think even as you guys are speaking, right, I'm just very reminded about one of my experiences, in the past. And I was just sharing this with a friend last night, where I had a hen's night, before Jeremy and I got married. And I invited my closest 5 girlfriends to like a staycation, and then we had that together. And then even as we were chatting, late into the night, they shared with me how at this point, right, they felt like, wow, Gillian, you've changed so much, and a bit like how Kate, your friend was talking to you, and I didn't know that it was going in this particular direction, but I think they felt it was such a safe space that they could share their real thoughts with me. And then they were just saying, how Joe, sometimes now I feel like when we're having a conversation with you, right, we can't say certain things, or we can't freely speak our minds because wow, now you're so holy. And I mean, I'm not using the exact words, and I don't want to misquote them, but yeah, I think it was to that degree where they felt, in some sense, in my presence when they had conversations with me after I really dedicated my life to God, that they felt that they didn't have the same kind of safe space to share what they felt with me. And I think many times, in our zealousness or in, really in our love for people around us, we do want to share God with them, right? Or really share about our lives, because he is real in our lives. Just like how I said, like, okay, I met this friend yesterday. It's the same as how I would say, like, hey, yesterday, like, God showed me this, he told me this, because it's so real to us. It's not a concept, right? He really spoke to us, right? So how do we do that, and still take care of people's emotions and not make them feel uncomfortable, right? So I think, like, at that night when they started sharing this with me, I was a bit afraid, because I'm like, oh no, like, how am I going to respond to them? But I just felt in that moment also that I was so thankful for them, because even what they felt at that moment, they were okay to tell me that, hey, I feel a bit strange when I'm talking to you sometimes. I feel a bit uncomfortable. And I felt that at that moment, I just really had to humble myself and also say, like, hey, I hear you guys. I really hear and understand what you're going through. And like, it's not for me to like dumb down my faith or to filter myself, but to say, hey, I know that you're feeling this way, and I don't want you to feel this way, because like, I love you, right? So how do I then navigate that moving forward? And I think that so for some of us, even from that night, right, like some of my friends and I, like, we move on, and then we still have conversations about God, and it's fine now, and they don't feel the same way. And I think it's because like we hear each other out. And I think it's about really being authentic, and number one, not being apologetic for it, but at the same time also knowing and understanding like who you're speaking to and how you should deliver like whatever you're saying, right? I don't know if it makes sense, but I was just thinking about this experience, when you guys were talking.
Teacher, can I share something?
Sure.
So what you're saying is a beautiful illustration. I feel like when I join the dots in my mind, what it seems to me is like what you're saying is a beautiful illustration of a principle that should be foundational to any believer's walk. And it is this: the idea that our personal distinctiveness in Christ and in the world, the fragrance that we emit or lack thereof, should be fundamentally different from who we used to be, right? There's got to be a change in our lives. It's got to look like something. If not, like, it's just a proclamation without any evidence. But the distinctiveness needs to be balanced with relatability. And so the truth of the Christian's life is that truth lies in tension. Nothing that we experience can be seen as a clearly black or white, a binary issue. Often we have to juggle two competing truths: the need for distinctiveness and to be set apart from the world, but at the same time to be all things to all men and to be totally one with our friends and relatable, right? Because the point of it is to make people so palatable and to show people that there is a better way of living, as opposed to being inaccessible, which is not attractive at all, by the way. So accessible Christianity, man. That's where it's at. Yeah. Truth lies in tension.
I mean, it's difficult, but I think like when we are able to have that fine balance, like Tim says, when you are like perfectly in tension, I think like that's where we feel like, we fully feel like human, and also at the same time we need to rely on God as well, because like we can't do it alone, right? Yeah.
You know what irritates me about humans is that they're not like computers. They are complicated. Computers, as complex as they are, right? They're simple once you get them. But humans are there's so much gray when we deal with people. And look, I mean, at the end of the day, right, you have two options. You can either roll the punches, be resilient, and be okay and learn how to deal with gray, or you can be a misanthrope, and you can just hate people and go and live on a mountain. Sadly, there are not many mountains to live in Singapore, which means that we only actually have one option, which is to
deal with gray.
Deal with it. And
I mean, like, strangely, when you're saying that, I'm just realizing that, wow, our brain, like, is called gray matter, right? So it's like, it's not black and white, right? So like,
That's how I feel now. That's why I have nothing to say. I feel like I'm learning so much from this conversation. I'm just like, just continue.
But Kate, you were sharing with us also about like, how you in your own experience also, like when you talk about authenticity, right? Like, what have you been thinking about or experiencing so far?
You know, Jill, as you were sharing your story, the one thing that I realized is that my my relationship with God now has become the basis for how I want my relationship with the people around me to be, right? And so I think I was sharing with you that my daily devotion today was about opening your heart to God, right? And what does that mean? That really means being so real with Him, so honest and so authentic and consistent with Him that, you know, tell Him like my sins, I tell Him my fears, I give Him everything that is deep, deep, deep in my heart. And that's when He knows who I am. Do you know what I mean? Like He doesn't just know about me, but He knows who I am and He knows what's inside of me, and it's a two-way conversation, right? And so it's by having that relationship and that trust and that comfort with Him that I'm just like, okay, He loves me for who I am, right? And He knows who I am. And isn't that how we want our friends and family to know us as well? Right? We want them to be able to know our intentions. We want them to know our heart. We want them to know that we just want what's best for them and we want a relationship. So like I'm just, I think like Tim said, humans are not easy creatures, right? Because God knows our hearts. He knows whether we're telling the truth. But I think sometimes with the people around us, it's like a lot of different things come into play, including like history in a relationship, like maybe you guys, like you have a bad past and then, so doubt starts to flow in. So I guess one of my questions is like, how do I navigate that and really just build strong relationships that do not have all these little nitty-gritty like doubts and fears that come in from the world. So that's just a question that's coming up in my head right now.
Yeah, and I think like what you shared, before also that you heard from a previous like sermon that you listened in on about how like I think you said honesty is like the foundation of intimacy in a relationship. And I think like that is really like what authenticity is like, is all about. So I think that so often, right, in relationships, we are not honest because we're afraid to lose the person or afraid about what the person thinks of us. But what the person really needs from us is the very thing that we're shying away from, which is to be honest, right? And it's so funny, and I think that sorry, do you want to say something?
I think it stems from the fear of having the people who love us view us differently or view us in a manner that we just don't feel comfortable being viewed as, because I think the reason why we can open our hearts so freely to God, maybe we can't sometimes as well because of this same fear, but is that He loves us no matter what, right? Like I really feel like because of all He's done for me, I know who He is and I know that He'll love me no matter what, and that I don't want to let Him down, But I think when it comes to human relationships, right, sometimes it's just that fear, that little fear that if I'm honest with you, then you're going to see me for who I am, you're going to see my flaws, and will you love me less? Do you know what I mean? So I think that's where the fear comes from. So how do we balance that? How do we still be honest and still not love each other less? And I think that love really is an overflow of the love that we get from God, because as I grow in my walk with Him, right, I'm just like, no matter the flaws that anyone in my life has, right, I still want to love them the same. I still want to love strangers, and I think that's where your identity comes in, right? As you get more love from Him, then you have all this outpouring, and you're like, no matter what happens, I'm just going to love on people, no matter who they are. And I think that's so beautiful. I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah. I think like even as you're speaking, right, I realized that sometimes in our relationships, when we are fearing of like being honest about what we say or what we do, it's almost a sense of like wanting to control how the other person reacts to us in that sense, right? Because we want them to love us. But if we are able to put aside that discomfort, right, or fear, where we're like, if I'm honest, will this happen? So for me, sometimes like, if the desire to want an authentic relationship is stronger than that fear, you're going to be able to overcome it, in a particular situation where I would, tell myself like, okay, you know what, I'm scared to do this, I'm scared to say this to this person, but I want this authentic relationship more than the idea of a relationship, but without honesty. And then I would do it, I would say it. And then what would then happen, right, is that I'm giving an opportunity to that person in that relationship to decide whether they want to love me for who I am and not like what I do, or because of what I just said and it has made them uncomfortable. So this will allow the relationship to be stronger because that person has just decided to put aside whether that thing that I said made them uncomfortable, but yet still want to go through life with me. Do you know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Can I just jump in and share a few thoughts? I've been
I see
writing
you've been
down.
writing it down.
Yeah, I'm creating a little mind map, over here. Something just occurred to me, guys, that I think is not heresy. So I'm gonna share it, okay? Oh, this is a risky one. So so you remember how we talked about truth lying intention, right?
Yeah.
What we're actually in pursuit of, I mean, nothing in the Bible says that we are to pursue authenticity, but it does talk about to pursue truth, right? And so this truth, which lies in tension, is the foundation stone or is the anchor for all of our experiences and our experiential reality, the way we live our life, the way we interact with other people. It's got to be founded on some degree of the truth. Now, when we desire to be loved in our truth, and sometimes therefore make amendments to our presentation in order to be more acceptable to others, that's when actually we are doing two things. Number one, we are living in the tension, the very human, fully human tension of wanting to be loved in society and needing to be real and true with our metaphysical values, right? The things that we hold dear to our heart. That's one. The other, though, is when we seek to change who we know we should be to be more acceptable to others, we compromise that truth at the same time.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is we are given two options. When there is a balance, and we have two competing tensions, we have to either choose to honor both tensions and balance them perfectly, or if the desire is stronger to be loved than to be true to ourselves and hold to our values, then what will happen is compromise will occur and balance will be thrown out of whack, right? But so that's one idea, right? This idea of truth having to lie in tension, and it exists as much with men as it does with God. Now, this is the part where I go into the risky area, okay? I think we have to be honest with the Lord. And what that means is we're not talking about the baseline level of like go before the Lord and confess your sins and be honest with him and don't hide anything from him. No. It's about calling and destiny. Some of us are built to be fashion label designers like Audrey's, right? Shout out to Audrey's, what's up? And we love you, girl. And some of us are built to do that. But if we grew up in a society that programs us to be doctors, lawyers, and mathematicians and engineers, engineer I must say because I'm Indian, so all of the Indians have to be engineers. Bob is a worship engineer. I am a holiness engineer. So
Put that on your name card. Put that on your name card. I take your work.
Engineer, right? Yeah. So we can be socialized into certain ideas, but at the same time, Christianity can socialize us into certain pursuits. So when we talk about the ideals of Christianity, Audrey says hi. When we talk about the ideals of Christianity, we often frame it sometimes like the goal, the mountaintop to reach is to be the prophet or to be the evangelist or to be the this or to be that. And then we idolize the functional ministry and we make it a vocational ministry. When actually, right, our vocational ministry was always intended to be akin to the desire of our heart and the calling of our heart. Now, of course, I'm talking about the surrendered calling, not the selfish calling lah. So I grew up wanting to be like Michael Jackson. I will pour powder all over my living room floor and try to moonwalk on it, okay? Because I wanted to be an entertainer. And for many years of my life, I pursued entertainment. I got really good at it because that was who I wanted to be. Now, when I surrendered my life finally, I ended up doing humanitarian work and going to Africa, right? It is totally far away from entertainment. But what I had to be true to myself eventually was, I'm not sure my role is, to be a mega evangelist or to do this or to do that. I feel called to Africans. I feel called to developing farms in refugee camps, and it is totally boliao in Singapore's context. But I am being true to who he has made me to be. And I have to be honest with him and say, look, I know that I have been socialized in a direction. I've been told that I'm supposed to move, head for government or head into law or policy making or this or that. But to be honest, I just care about Africans and sheep, and that's where my heart is at. And I have to be honest with God as much as it is with people. And sometimes these ideas can be disappointing to other listeners, right? Because they were like, oh man, you had so much potential, but you just focus on Africa with sheep. And but this is the tension point. I have to be honest with him as well as them, all right? And that is it takes courage to land on that point of authenticity. So like, why this message is relevant for our listeners today, right, is because at the end of the day, we have to be true to who he has called us to be in our heart, not who he has called us to be over the pulpit. And that's not pouring cold water over what is said from the pulpit. It's just that the pulpit provides us with general aspirations, and we are supposed to amalgamate those aspirations into the DNA that God has written for our individual lives, not the other way around. We're not supposed to twist our life calling to fit some ideological aspiration that is broad brushed, painted for everybody to aspire towards. That is where authenticity and individuality lie.
Wow.
So Tim, I have a practical question for you.
Okay.
How
Ask
how
an
did
engineer,
you
he knows everything.
how did you know you wanted to be an African farm engineer? Do you know what I mean? Like, how did you arrive? How did you arrive at that point? Do you know?
Yeah, I do know. Actually, it's very close to my heart because right now, a lot of my people in the Congo and in Kenya, they are Kenya less lah. Congo now is under lockdown from COVID, and they do not have a health system, and so
I've seen that on the news.
Yeah, so I'm very, very concerned because I was just thinking of starting a new business outfit in the Congo. There's this orphanage that God connected me with like 3 years ago, and I've been holding off because I've been focusing on another country. But I'm just feeling the prompting and the pull back to the Congo right now, and so I've started talking to all my buddies and yeah. So anyway, to answer your question, I'm sorry, that was a quick
It's okay.
To answer your question, right? The realization of who I was meant to be in this season, because it changes, people of the Spirit, John chapter 3 verse 8, right? Like, nobody knows where the Spirit comes from, where it goes to, but we see his effects, and we are called to be disciples of the wind because he is the wind, he's like the wind. So for us, we just obey. We are like the ship that gets blown by the wind. It's just that the wind tends to be consistent, but the wind also changes. I don't know if either of you is a sailor. Do you sail like boats and stuff? Okay, but I kind of I got somehow I think that like random people are sailors. I grew up sailing. My uncle taught me how to sail, and one of the things that I realized is that there's so many life lessons to learn from sailing. By the way, the wind is consistent for the most part, but the wind changes. And when the wind changes, you can try to do the thing that you used to do, but it ain't gonna work out. You have to pivot and you have to go with the wind. And so how I knew came about as a result of a journey. So I started in government. I then moved into youth and leadership development with an institute that was being built in SMU. And then subsequent to that, God started speaking to me very clearly about becoming a missionary and going to Africa and living in Africa. So I would say that I would not really have been happy to obey if I didn't first do the things that I thought I was supposed to do, and then have him pivot me, have him redirect me. One of the most key skills that we need to learn, and this is something that he's been repeating to me time and time again in this COVID season, right, is the word pivot. We have to be reactive and responsive to the directional changes that he gives us. And I think that this whole circuit breaker lockdown situation is the perfect opportunity to put your ears to the train tracks and to see what is there a train coming, and what is the next move? And if there is a next move, how are we supposed to adjust ourselves to abide in the next move? To answer your question real quick, it was a result of two things. Number one, it was the previous journey that I was allowed to go on, and number two, it was him speaking very clearly to me. It's not something that I would ordinarily have jumped into because I got out of bed one morning and said, I'm going to be a missionary in Africa. No, okay, it's the furthest thing from my mind. I mean, of course, there were, when we were all kids, I'm sure some of us have said, God, use me, Lord, spend me, Lord, take up my shoe, wave around my shoe, how beautiful are the feet of those who, So, yes, I had all of those moments, and I was willing as a child, as a kid, as a youth to go out all the way for Jesus. Little did I know that he would take me up on my word. And yeah, man. So don't anyhow
Be
make
careful what you say. Yes, correct.
Careful what you say. Be careful what you say. Yeah.
Wow, so good.
Wow.
Yeah.
I like the Jill, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, I think even as Tim is speaking, right, it's so relatable because when I'm thinking about this theme of authenticity and being true to who God made you to be and how you bring that in your daily life, in your decisions. It could be big decisions like what I would do for work, whether it's nonprofit or being in the secular world, out in the marketplace. But it's also down to the small things, right, of how you would carry yourself in a coffee conversation with a friend, or even I think something that I recall is also saying yes to things that we want to say yes to and not fearing to say no to things that we don't want to, right? Whether it's a career or whether it's a meetup with friends, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think some of us do struggle with, whether also, we want to spend time with this particular group of friends or, maybe do something else, right? And I think that yesterday when I was just speaking to another friend, she was just asking me about how do I navigate this, where actually deep inside her heart, right, she really feels that she doesn't want to talk to this group of friends on Zoom where they have a house party or whatever lah, and she just really wanted to have her own time to do other things. But because she also felt so loved, and appreciated by her friends who invited her on this Zoom call, she just felt that maybe I should just honor them and then go onto the call. And she went on it, despite feeling like she didn't want to go on it. And then she realized that, hey, even after the call, she felt like I shouldn't have done that. I didn't really want to do that. So how do we even navigate that kind of thing where from big things, yes, we understand that in terms of our career and all of that, we want to say yes to what God has called us to do and all. But in smaller things like that, it's very easy to just not obey the voice of God or to just put aside our true feelings, authentic feelings of maybe I don't want to be on this Zoom call with these friends, right? And I just want to spend time myself. How do I say no to that? Because I think the big things is very easy to talk about, but the small things in our lives, how do we be authentic with that as well? You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you have some experiences to share.
Just
So actually, I'm going to Jill, I'm going to tie your question into Audrey's question because she asked us a question, but I think your question, Jill, what you're talking about is like your everyday decisions, your everyday actions, right? And
Yeah.
Audrey's question was, please talk more about changing with the times and seasons when it comes to our identity, our character, our decisions, our actions, because there will come different seasons in your life. You're just like, I don't want to do this, this is not
Yeah.
something I want to spend my time on, right? Or like, but your identity and your character are still solid, but like how do you deal with, the changing times and the seasons, and how do you still stay authentic despite the change around you? Oh geez, that's such a hard question.
Yeah, but it's manageable. It's manageable if your identity is not locked in. So
Yeah.
what I would say is, that if you are unwilling to change and you lock in your identity, then you are following yourself. You are the standard for your own behavior. But if you always live with the psychology that you are merely a responsive agent to the wind, you are the sailboat on the waves of life, and the Holy Spirit is the wind that directs your path, the sun drives the currents of your life. Ooh, that's a good one. Shakaba. The sun drives the currents of your life. Man, Tim, write it down.
Jill, quick, type it out. He's waiting for you to type it out.
Great, man.
Sun
Jill,
drives
right.
the currents of our life.
Good bad out here. So
Which is every
the sun drives the currents of your life.
I
And you
I'm laughing.
you are the malleable sailboat, not anchored, but ever responsive. If that is how you see the role and the function of your life, right, to perpetually be responsive to the master's demands and to go when he says go and to come when he says come, then you will not encounter that difficulty of inertia that we talked about. Now, what happens is, to throw out a sailing analogy, right? If you are anchored in the bay and the tides come and go, you will get pulled in one direction and pulled in another direction. Your boat will pivot around your anchor point, or rather, your boat will pivot around your anchor point, but you won't really drift. But the point of the Christian's life and the point of boats is to move, to drift, not to stay still. And so, my suggestion, or the way I think about it is like, what is your anchor point, no? Yeah, and what is your purpose? If your purpose is to be obedient to the function and the drift, then be obedient to the function and the drift. And if you're okay, I see your hand is raised. Are you saying glory, hallelujah?
I have a question. Usually, hallelujah is like the hands full up. This one is like question hand. So,
Okay.
you see, right? This is such a new concept to me, because then are you saying that our identities will change? Our identities are malleable? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do I put this? Okay, so like if you look at today's world, right? It just came to me. It's so interesting, right? You take the like 16 personalities test, and they're like, okay, this is your personality, and so you're like, okay, this is who I am. This is my personality. So this is what I'm going to stick with. This is what is going to determine my actions. But then when I think about Audrey's question, I think of your answer, right? I'm just like, wow, in my walk with God, right? I am ever changing. I'm ever changing, but I know which direction I'm going in. There's a direction I'm going into. It's to become more like Him and to become a better person in that sense, right? So does this mean that our identity will always change? And like, what does that look like, right? So let's say like, if my identity is to be like, entrepreneur, like fire starter, like, that kind of thing, will that change throughout my entire life? Like, what does that look like? So it's just a very new concept to me, because I wouldn't have thought that, okay, your identity is supposed to change according to like seasons and times, so that's just a question that I have.
You're right. Some identities change and some identities don't. The identity that doesn't change is your metaphysical identity, if you will, right? So I keep talking about these values, these anchor points, that once you ascribe to them, Ideally, you are not
Yeah.
a flimsy individual, flip-flopping
Yeah,
between
yeah.
different ideological schools and worldviews. If you lock into something and the evidence shows that your worldview is correct and leads to the greatest good, stick to your worldview. And if the evidence that comes about and you are personally convinced that, oh my gosh, actually, my current worldview is not as adequate to deal with the problems of life, right?
Yeah.
Um, Origins, morality, destiny, and something else, right? Is what the great Ravi said. Shout out to Ravi. Yeah, man. That's a painful one, right?
Yeah.
Then shift your worldview. If the evidence doesn't align with your worldview, shift the worldview because you need to be truthful and you need to be consistent. But although your values-based identity doesn't change, your functional identity does change. The vocational deployment of your life may change from season to season. It comes with promotions and it comes with demotions. It comes with promotions to household manager of a wealthy Egyptian's house, and it comes with demotions and being chucked in prison to be a prison warden. And then it comes with promotions again. And we are functionally changed, but we are fundamentally unchanged. So we have our anchors within, and we also have our temporary anchors without. The boat's anchor is never meant to be used permanently. The boat is for, but sometimes the boat is at harbor and sometimes the boat is moving. And when we are supposed to be moving and we're supposed to adopt the functional identity of movement, of activity, of fulfilling a certain function, whether it be transporting cargo or people or leisure, sailing leisure, do that. But when you're supposed to be at rest, when you're supposed to be in one particular vocational placement that you're not supposed to move from, then obey that. But that doesn't change the fact that one day you are it doesn't mean that one day you are a car, one day you are a bus, one day you are a boat. You are a boat the whole way.
Yes,
You are,
yes. Wow.
Yeah.
Perfect analogy.
To stretch the analogy. Okay.
Wow.
I know Jill has to go, but I'm just so grateful because I feel like I've learned so much from you.
Yes,
Tim. Like,
yes.
please, can you come again?
It will be my honor too. Are we wearing singlets again?
Yes, yes. That's all I have. I only have black singlets. I have nothing else in my wardrobe. I'm sorry.
No, it's good, man. It's good. I'll come with a better singlet next time. This one is a bit
Yeah, I gotta go.
I want to thank you for your time. You see, even Audrey's is like, we are functionally changed, but fundamentally unchanged. 100, 100, 100. Wow, thanks, Tim. So good. Audrey, we're so happy to have you. Tim, thanks so much for your time. I really took this as a learning opportunity, and I feel like I've gleaned so much, and I need to unpack this week. That's probably what I'm gonna do for the rest of the week. Have to watch again, take down the notes, and then unpack this. I know Jill has to go, so shall we close in a quick word of prayer?
Sure. Yeah.
Jill, you wanna do the honors?
Okay. Thank you, Father God, Lord. I just want to thank you, Father, for Tim, that is gracing our conversation here today, Lord. And I just thank you for even those that are watching. And Lord, I pray, Lord, that even in our lives daily, that we may be the same inside and out, Lord, and that you are our anchor, Lord, and you are our direction, Lord, and that even as we continue to put you first in our life, Lord, that you would just direct our boat in the right path, Lord. And I pray for everyone who's also searching and wondering about their identity, that they know, that there is a God out there that can tell them about who they are and what they are designed for. And I just pray, Father, that even in this week ahead, today, being a public holiday, that they will have such rest, and that in the times ahead, whether it's work or being a parent or anything else, Lord, that you will just bless them, and that the peace that surpasses all understanding will be with us, Lord God. So we just thank you again for Tim, for Kate, and even for the people that are here with us. And I just give you praise and all the honor in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Tim.
Welcome, girls. Welcome. It's an honor to be on. Thank you for letting me come on and share with you guys today.
A
No, it was
pleasure.
so good. Thank you
Bye,
everyone for
everyone.
watching. Bye,
See
Audrey.
ya.